Welcome to Threads of Sustainability, where we dive into the stories behind sustainable quilting and textile arts. I'm your host, Bridget O'Flaherty, guiding you through the vibrant world of eco-conscious creators, innovators, producers, and industry players. Join us as we explore the intersection of textile creativity and sustainability, a narrative that threads together the past, present, and future of mindful textile practices. Hi there, it's Bridget, and I am excited to bring this episode to you. This was an episode that I recorded last year, and I had this really great conversation with Anna, and it got kind of shelved, not because of the conversation, but because my life took a different direction for a little while. But I am coming back to it, and I am coming back to Threads of Sustainability with a new lens. You're going to hear the episodes changing slightly as we go forward, but I wanted to wrap this one up, this season, this series, with this particular episode. And I think it's really fitting because I had this great conversation with Anna Hunter, and she's from Long Way Homesteads, and we talked about this idea of wool as a regenerative fiber. And that is where I want to focus a lot. And the resiliency piece, I want to talk about that a lot more as well. So this is a good segue into where I'm going to be going with the podcast in the future. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Anna. It was a great spark for me to start thinking about what we can do differently and how we can view textiles a little differently in our everyday lives. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoy this. You're going to hear her talk about a book, and she now has 2 books actually. And the second book is brilliant. And I really think that that's something you should take a look at. I will talk about it at the end of the episode. I hope you enjoy this. I have with me here today Anna Hunter, and she has a business, Long Way Homestead, and it's a really exciting business as far as I'm concerned because it's all about wool, and I use wool in my own work, but it's Canadian wool and it's Canadian industry, and it's got circularity to it, and it's really exciting stuff. And I'm welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you agreed to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's so good. I want to know a little bit about how you got from A to B. So
Okay.
I was checking out some of your videos online about some of the history, and you were introduced to textiles by an aunt overseas. Is that right?
I was working as a nanny in Switzerland, and the aunt of the family I was working for had this beautiful sweater on. And like my grandmother was a prolific knitter, crocheter, sewer, but I didn't really enjoy what she made. So my understanding of knitwear was things that didn't feel good and didn't fit. So when I was in Switzerland, this aunt came for Christmas, and she had on this beautiful sweater. And I was like, tell me where you bought that. I need it. And she said, oh, I made it. I knit it. And it changed my life. I was like, wow, you can knit things that look like that. You have to teach me how. So we walked to the grocery store, and I bought straight needles and like 8 balls of wool. And she taught me how to cast on and knit and purl. And over the Christmas vacation, I learned to knit. And that was really the beginning of it.
And what kind of age range was this, in your 20s? When
I was 18.
You're 18. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a young introduction into this world. Okay. So you learned how to knit.
I learned how to knit like before Ravelry and YouTube and knitting stores that were everywhere. I came back to Canada, and I went to university, and I got out of the library knitting for dummies because I'd kind of gone beyond what I had already, the skill I already had. And that book helped me sort of get to the next level. And I knit throughout my entire university career. I would knit in all my lectures, and every single one of my friends had probably horribly ill-fitted hats and mittens, and even some sweaters and scarves, because I just knit constantly. It was just this thing I did that just kept me focused.
Yeah.
So that it wasn't until 2009, many years later, I was working as a legal advocate in the downtown east side of Vancouver. So frontline social work type work. It was really intense. My job, the funding for my position got terminated, and I kind of didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I felt really upended. And my husband, Luke, said, well, you should just do something with your knitting. Like, that's really the only other thing that you really enjoy doing besides like the anti-poverty work that I did. So I thought, oh, I'll just, maybe I'll knit stuff and sell the finished products. And I wasn't a pattern designer. I wasn't an indie dyer. Like, I didn't even know those things weren't really a thing yet. I just loved to knit. But it was too selling knitwear. I just didn't know how that would make sense. But what I did know was that in the East Vancouver community that I lived in at that time, who I was and how I presented in the world, I never really felt comfortable going into the yarn stores in Vancouver that existed at that time. So I was like, I'm going to open up a community-focused, like, badass knitting store that is 100-mile yarn store. So I'm selling only local wool, and like all the punks and the queer kids can come in and they can feel safe and comfortable in the shop because, we didn't feel comfortable anywhere else. So that's what I did. So in 2009, I opened up Bad Anna's Yarn Shop in East Vancouver. It didn't end up being a 100-mile yarn store because I couldn't find any local wool.
Yeah, I was going to ask, were you able to accomplish that?
Yeah, not the 100-mile yarn part. I think the other stuff I did pretty well, but I couldn't find any local wool. And I was like, my shelves will be empty. So I just like focused on promoting local indie dyers as they started kind of growing in the region. And then, local designers. And it was just a really amazing community space. And the yarn shop still exists. I'm so happy that it still exists in Vancouver. So then in 2015, and then Luke and I at that point had 2 kids, and Vancouver just didn't feel like a good place for us anymore. It was, housing insecure, and the cost of living was so high. And we actually just wanted more for our kids. Like, we wanted them to have a closer connection to their food. Like, and we wanted that for ourselves, but we really wanted that for our kids. And Luke was from Winnipeg. So we decided to sell the business and pack all our kids up and everything we owned. And we, moved to Manitoba, which is where we live now.
Nice. And so you moved to Manitoba, and what are you doing in Manitoba?
Right. So we moved to Manitoba and we found 140 acres. We didn't really plan to farm. We were just like, we're going to homestead. We're going to have like a bunch of chickens and some pigs and of course a sheep because knitting. But it was like, we're just going to figure out how to provide for ourselves, like just total homestead style. And Luke is from Winnipeg. And so we were home once for a visit and realized that the cost of land in Manitoba was like more affordable than pretty much anywhere else in Canada. And so, we were like, if we move to Manitoba, like, sure, it's a little colder, but we can have our like homestead right away. So we moved there, found 140 acres, and
that's a big homestead.
It was way bigger than we thought.
That's really big.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing how, just how we found it. We brought home 5 chicks the first weekend that we moved to the house. Like we were kind of in a rush or anxious or I don't know, foolish. We just thought we could do it all. So brought these chickens home. And I always now tell people, like, watch out, chickens are the gateway animal, because 6 months into raising these chickens, we got our egg, like we got eggs for the first time. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can do this. I can be a farmer. And that winter I read every book I could get my hands on farming. Like it was an explosion of curiosity in my mind around how farming could be beneficial to the land and not exploitative. And I was just like, okay, I need to be a farmer. And then it was that summer that we bought our first flock of sheep and have been raising sheep ever since. So that was 2016. So I've been raising sheep since 2016. And then in 2018, we opened up a wool mill. And that was just, I don't know, I feel like we keep leveling up on the ridiculous ideas with no idea what we're doing. But there was no mill in the region. And I was like, how did I know this? How did I not know that I now have a flock of sheep, but there's nowhere to process the wool?
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's dig into that a little bit, because the wool industry in Canada It's got a big history in Canada. It is one of the only fibers that's produced in Canada now. It's growing. There's some of the other plant-based fibers that are starting to grow again, but the only one that's been consistent is wool. But wool in Canada generally gets shipped overseas. It doesn't get processed in Canada.
Yeah, you're right. So, we grow around 3 million pounds of wool a year in the country, the majority of which is seen as a byproduct to the lamb industry. So most of the sheep farmers in Canada are raising sheep for meat, and that's a struggling industry as well. But the wool is it's not valued at all. And
no, my neighbor who raises sheep, and they are meat sheep, and he sometimes has to pay to have the wool, and when he shears the sheep, to have it taken away for him. And sometimes he'll get $5 per fleece.
Yeah, it's a total crisis point. Like, we have one large wool buying body in the country, the Canadian Cooperative Wool Growers, and then just small guys like me, but they're paying 12 cents a pound for wool, which, if you know about how much wool comes off a sheep, that's generally less than $5 for a sheep. And the cost of shearing a sheep is anywhere from $5 to $10. So at this point, for farmers, it's not even worth the cost of shipping it to the wool growers. Most farmers are just dragging it into the back 40 and trying to burn it or let it compost. And you're right. Like, it wasn't like this 150 years ago. We had a thriving wool industry in Canada. We were growing 11 million pounds of wool a year, and we had the infrastructure to manufacture 90% of that. So we were producing the clothing and textiles that our communities needed. And, over the last 100 years, we've seen that industry become completely decimated. Part of that is because of the globalized system of textile production in general. Most of Canada's wool goes to China now, or at least before COVID it did. Things were disrupted by COVID. So we're not even moving the Canadian wool that used to go there. We're just storing it in warehouses. But, and part of it is due to our increasing reliance on synthetics, where people want to buy those easy fabrics rather than wool. So lots of other reasons why the industry has failed, but it is in a crisis point. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what you decided to do in terms of a localized economy.
Right. So when we realized there was no mill, we saw that as an opportunity, as trying to figure out how to make a living on this farm and living rurally. And part of it was to meet a need, to recognizing that there was no wool processing and that we needed that. So in 2018, we opened up a mill. We have what is called a mini mill. So it's pretty small batch, which is incredible for the flexibility that it has. We can go from processing a small batch of fine wool from a Targhee sheep, and then the next day do individual fleeces from a Shetland flock. Like, we just have a lot of flexibility. Perhaps maybe the one challenge is that we can't process large amounts. Our scale is quite small.
Right.
So our impact at this point has been pretty small. Yeah.
So are you taking in other farmers' fleeces as well, or are you just doing your own processing?
So we process the wool from our flock. We buy about 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of wool a year from farmers in the region that, we just buy it on a per pound basis.
Okay.
And then we process it and put our label on it. It's our yarn. Okay. And then we do custom processing for farmers. So they'll bring their wool, we'll process it into what they want, and then they pick it up. And
so what are some of the different things that you process it into?
At this, like, our focus is yarn, but we can also do batting or roving. So that's what most people will get.
Okay. And are you doing other fibers as well, or are you just doing wool?
When we started, we did some of the exotics. So we did llama and alpaca and some mohair and some Angora rabbit, but we aren't anymore. We've realized that we really specialize in wool, and that's what we're best at. So we stopped doing anything other than sheep's wool.
Okay. And you don't do any plant-based processing?
No, our machinery is not equipped to do plant-based.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's another area. It's a whole other conversation. That's another area where we used to have the textile mills and the industry here, and it's gone. But there's a few small mills starting to come back again. I know there's some in Quebec and in Ontario. on the East
And
Coast.
there's, a flax mill in Nova Scotia.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're slowly coming together.
Yeah.
You know? Like, do you see that we might have a textile industry in Canada again someday?
I'm incredibly optimistic and hopeful. I think we need to think beyond just textiles when it comes to wool. I mean, in my perfect world, we would be manufacturing and consuming textiles that are grown and manufactured here. But I think the current state of Canadian wool is such that we don't want to wear that next to our skin. It's pretty coarse. It's not textile quality wool.
Sure.
So I think to revolutionize the Canadian wool industry, we need to find ways that we can revalue Canadian wool without going right away to clothing.
Right. So what do you see that maybe being?
Well, for me, the first answer is wool pellets. And that's something that we started doing about 2 years ago. So basically we're taking it started as an option for the skirtings off of the dirtiest wool. So like when you shear a sheep, you've got the belly wool and the neck wool and like anything that's covered in manure or stained or whatever. And you just throw that away because it's too dirty to clean. Sure. So we take that dirty wool and we run it through a machine that essentially uses heat and force to push it through a dye plate into little pellets. So cool. If you picture the pellets that you use in, I don't know, some people use it as litter. Sometimes you can find it in feed, but it's that format, but it's pure wool and it is a soil amendment or fertilizer. So when you use it in your gardens, awesome. It's high in nitrogen and other nutrients. One of the best things about it is its water holding capacity because wool can just hold on to 30% of its weight in water. So it can replace peat moss. And if you're a gardener, you know how unsustainable peat moss is in that industry. Exciting. So wool can be a replacement. So one of the biggest bottlenecks in processing wool to anything else is the scouring. So that's the washing. And it's a bottleneck because you need a lot of energy and you need a lot of water. Energy to heat that water because that's what you need to get the lanolin out. And everyone experiences a bottleneck at that scouring stage. But the thing about pellets is they don't need to be scoured. You process them dirty.
You actually want to keep the dirt in there.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've been producing pellets for almost 3 years now. And for me, I approached it as this stepping stone to getting where we really want to get. So I buy wool from farmers for pellets for $1 a pound, which is literally triple or quadruple what farmers are making through the wool growers. So they're pretty motivated. They'll just bring me all their wool. They're so happy to have somewhere to go with it. And that gives me an opportunity to have a conversation with a farmer where I'm like, you have some really nice wool here. I think with a few management changes or maybe some different handling on shearing day, I would actually pay you more like $4 or $5 a pound for your wool. And they're blown away. They can't believe it. It requires them to do some work, but now they're incentivized because their wool's actually worth something.
Yeah, for sure.
And meanwhile, I get to take these pellets and sell them to gardeners who are pretty excited about not using either synthetic fertilizer or peat moss or whatever. And it's a way that we can almost immediately revalue wool. And we can do it on a regional scale that's also beneficial for our land base. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's the first step.
That's exciting. And so how are you taking over the world with this? Are you going to scale even further?
Well, so it's kind of funny that you say that because when I kind of started telling people we were pelleting and we were going to do this, I had people reaching out to me all over North America being like, how can I get in on this? And I had this moment where I was like, I don't want to be this centralized location of pelleting information. I think it will work best if we regionalize it, if there's a pelleting operation in every region across the country.
Wouldn't that be great?
I started doing workshops and telling people, what equipment how I source the equipment, what electrical needs you require, like all about shelf stability and packaging and marketing. And since that, which I started doing 2 years ago, there's been over 15 more pelleting operations open up in North America.
That's amazing.
Which is, it's really exciting. And I think it can help us figure out this roadmap towards revaluing wool on a bigger scale.
Agreed.
If we've already built these relationships between producers of wool, the sheep farmers, and those of us that are revaluing it and turning it into a marketable product, we're set up in this sort of mini regional supply chain for the next step, whether that's scouring or whether that's carding or whether that's textiles or whatever it is. We've already laid the groundwork.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how circular that whole thing is, right? Like that is really just it's feeding the land in such a great way, and then taking from the land in such a great way, and using those natural product and creating products and industry within our own small localized regions, which I think is a really, really important step towards sustainability. I think that I don't know, it can get into sort of a bit of a rabbit hole conversation, but I feel like localizing economies, trade economies, and simplified economies like this are much more important as a way forward in sustainability than commodification and capitalistic views. But that's getting a little deeper than maybe some of us want to go. But I think that we have to consider
I'm never afraid of going that deep.
I think we have to consider it. I think that it's a difficult road ahead because we have industry set up the way we do, and it's been running as a capitalist society for several centuries. But I think that there are pockets of folks who are realizing how important that localized economy is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about where you're at with your sheep now. Like, how many sheep do you have on your farm, and what kind of sheep?
Right. Well, so we have Shetlands. I wish I could say that I chose them for some reason. Other than that, I just found someone who trusted me enough to sell me some breeding stock. But I would go back, if I could do it again, I'd still go back and get Shetlands because they're just beautiful. They're lovely. They have amazing personalities and their wool is stunning. We only have about 35 sheep, and we keep our flock small, partly because of our own energy and ability to manage that flock with what we already have going on with the mill and our kids and all that. And we do a lot of agritourism on the farm. So we're bringing people in and touring them through the mill and through the farm and trying to talk about the fact that our clothing is agriculture, that our textiles come from the land and then they return to the land, and what the choices that we have along that life cycle of clothing is. So, and I do a lot of education and training, just trying to raise awareness about sustainable textiles in general, but wool more specifically. So Luke and I work full time in the mill and on the farm and the mill business, both of it. So I mean, we're really fortunate that we have the freedom and ability, and I guess the viability to run this business together on our farm. And we're not without work. We feel like we always have mountains of wool that we can't actually get through.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think that any farmer says, oh yeah, no, I'm out of work now.
I'm done for today.
I'm done for today. I don't think that's a sentence that a farmer ever says.
Yeah, no.
And it's a very underappreciated industry in many ways, because we interact, like, especially thinking about you from the textile side of things, like we interact with textiles every single day of our lives. We cannot function without textiles, but we don't necessarily pay attention to where those textiles have come from, and not only where have they come from, but what did it take to actually produce them? On whose backs was that production done? Whether it's a natural product or a synthetic product, on whose backs, and I don't think we ask ourselves like we want to ignore those questions. We don't want those answers.
Yeah, it's true. And, I think I have this little, I kind of do this lecture. I'm working on this project called The True Cost of Wool, which is, we don't pay the true cost of that, of those supplies and those textiles that we use, right? We don't think about what the cost is, nor is that cost necessarily even quantifiable when we look at, even the environmental impact and cost of superwashing yarn, right? Most people don't even know how that happens or what goes into it, yet we're using those every single day. So I think you're right, is so much of it is about that moment of, I don't know, realization that our textiles, our agriculture, and the Fibreshed says it really well. They have this question: what carbon pool is your clothing coming from? Like, is it, wool is 50% carbon, and whenever I talk about it, I remind people of the carbon cycle, right? Like carbon is in the atmosphere, and plants through the process of photosynthesis take it in through their leaves. And that is how they create complex carbohydrates that then the sheep come along and eat, and they eat those complex carbohydrates. And that's what helps them produce wool. And if you look at wool on a molecular level, it's 50% carbon. So it's like these little carbon sinks walking around, right? So we're literally sequestering carbon and storing it in our clothing. And then when that clothing is done, we can return that carbon back to the soil, where that carbon will then go to build more plants that more sheep will eat. So it's a real circular textile. And so the carbon pool is that our wool clothing is coming from, versus something like polyester or acrylic or nylon, where it is fossil fuel based and it's extracting carbon from the ground and through very damaging processes, turning it into a textile, right? So I always think about that. I have a little sign on my wall that just says what carbon pool is your clothing coming from. And it makes me think every single day, the implication of that.
Yeah. Well, and what your choices are when you're making them, like, are you thinking about any of this? Not, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard not to get overwhelmed with that. It's monumental, right? To think we have to take on the whole world every time we choose what clothing we're going to purchase, or
totally.
If we're going to buy our bedding and what kind of bedding we're going to buy, or we need a pair of shoes, like to take on the whole world problems of textiles and the way it's impacting our world. I think that we avoid thinking about that because it's overwhelming. It's just kind of a little bit too much, right?
And I'm a big believer that like we're all doing the best we can, right? Like here I am saying that I think about that while also, making choices all the time based on what I can afford or what is easy, because sometimes I just need things to be easy, right? So I think ultimately we are doing the best that we can. And I think my goal for my work or my career, or my passion, or whatever it is to take some of that individual weight off, that the weight on individuals off, and create systems that make it easier to consume products that are better.
Yeah.
And we can't do that without creating the system or the infrastructure to actually manufacture that.
Yeah. We need steps to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to me, like, what are your thoughts around end of life for woolen materials, woolen products? What do we have going on with that? I get asked this question all the time. Where can I take my materials?
Yeah, it's interesting. Textile recycling is such a ruse, right? Like so much of our textiles are ending up in landfills on the other side of the world, in poor and racialized communities, where they're left to deal with our mess. And we think, oh, well, I dropped it off at, Valley Village. It's all good.
Yeah, 30%. 30% of what gets dropped off at Valley Village actually makes it onto the floor. That's it.
Yeah.
The rest of it goes to recycling sorting centers and then is bundled and shipped overseas.
Yeah. It's pretty horrible. Well, and then if you look at the way that those clothes off gas, depending on how they're disposed of, that's another whole layer. Yeah, I think what I love about wool is that in a healthy compost system, wool can break down and start decomposing in 6 months, right? Like that's pretty amazing. And again, like I said, there's carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus in our wool, and those materials go back into our soil and our land base if we had a system to properly dispose of them.
Yeah. So what would that look like? What would that system look like?
I have no idea.
Like there's shoddy fabric, right? There's shoddy that you can do, which is chopping up the materials and then rebinding them into whatever. But there's those are few and far between. They're not readily available. There's a few places, I think, in the States that do shoddy. And I think there might still be spots in Europe that do shoddy, but I don't know of anywhere in Canada that does shoddy work.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, part of it for me too is just the length, the life cycle, how much longer we could keep our clothing and prevent it from that sort of easy discard option, right? If we had clothing that was more I don't know what the word is. It's not sentimental, but if we had clothing that we took more care of, it would last longer.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about wool, just also how resilient and how long living it is, right? We can just, I think I read that wool can be bent back and forth like 20,000 times before it shows any indication of breaking, whereas cotton is something like 5,000 times, right? So,
right.
And especially for us in northern climates, we're out there in minus 25 or minus 40 if you're in Winnipeg wearing cotton when we should just be wearing wool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thermal properties, the fact that it retains those thermal properties, even when it's wet, mold resistant, mildew resistant,
Yeah.
But for some people it's itchy and they don't like how it feels when they're wearing it. And, it's become a narrative that it's not a comfortable material. I don't know how we change that. Big marketing plan. Do we come up with a new marketing plan to be able to get wool to be mainstreamed again? I don't know.
I think so. And there's some of the merino, which, we don't grow significant amounts of merino in Canada, but the merino underclothes are very nice and soft. A lot of people, I think maybe just haven't had the right wool next to their skin.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, no, I have a sibling who can't wear wool at all, and I get all of her wool clothing. So that's awesome for me because I don't have trouble wearing wool against my skin.
Well, and I often wonder when people have said they are very sensitive to wool. I've said, have you ever touched wool, like a fine wool, so already very soft, that is very minimally processed? Because when you learn about commercial processing, even though it's wool and it's awesome and that's great, the commercial processing of wool is incredibly intense.
So talk to me a little bit about what is that? How does wool get processed?
So we don't do this in Canada, but because we don't have any of the mills to do or the equipment, but if you buy commercial yarn for your fiber arts practice, or if you buy a merino shirt, there's no veggie matter in it, right? There's no pieces of straw or hay or whatever. But if you buy farm yarn from me, you're always going to find a little bit of straw or hay in it. So I don't think people realize that all wool has veggie matter contamination.
Right.
But at the beginning of its life cycle, it goes through a process of carbonizing. So before the process of manufacturing it into yarn, the wool is soaked in this very caustic solution, and then they bake it, which causes all the veggie matter, so any hay, grass, leaves, whatever, to basically be cooked to into dust. And then they run this wool through these big, huge metal rollers to shake out the dust. And then because you've now raised the pH of wool, you have to bring it back down. So they put it in a sulfuric acid solution, or maybe the pH is the other way around. Either way, it then goes into sulfuric acid to neutralize the pH, and then they scour it for processing.
Right.
So that in and of itself is already modifying wool, putting things on it and in it. And then if it's a super wash wool, right? If it's a washable substance, then we have coated our wool in tiny microplastics, little polymers to prevent it from shrinking. So then that's interacting with our body. And then if it's anything other than white, chances are it's been dyed, right? And unless you're buying clothes from a natural dyer, those are acid-based dyes, right? Those are chemical dyes. And then now your skin is interacting with that. And I'm not a huge expert on it, so I won't go into it, but there's so much information out there about how dangerous chemical dyes are for our skin and our endocrine systems and all those things, right? So anyways, all that to say that sometimes I wonder if people's apprehension with wool is because it has so much crap on it rather than the wool itself.
Yeah, maybe it's hard to know. Hard to know for sure. So talk to me a little bit more about where you see your farm going and the work that you're wanting to do. What's your way forward right now?
That's a good question. I think for our farm, we are we're really happy with the course that we're on, educating people around sheep and wool and sheep and the way they interact with the land and how that impacts climate, and then the life cycle of our clothing and how we can make different choices with that. I think we'd like to increase our production. Because I came to this work from a fiber arts background or knitting background, and the knitting industry has grown so much since, even when I opened up Bad Anna's in 2009, especially the numbers of indie dyers and people who are doing beautiful things with color on yarn. But most of that yarn isn't sourced here. It's not grown here and it's not manufactured here. So
Right.
I think one of our goals is to start producing yarn that indie dyers can work with, so that we would have a strong Canadian yarn, base yarn for dyers, and get more yarn in the hands of knitters across the country.
That's exciting.
I think for me personally, I really want to, I think there is a significant momentum in Canada right now around the wool industry.
Yeah.
And I just want to see, a mini wool revolution here happen. I want to see things change for the better, everywhere in every region of the country.
Yeah, no, that's a very admirable goal. And I think that it's really important for other folks to realize that there are people out there doing the work like you're doing to try and make change on a larger than personal level. The personal level is great, but you are actually targeting larger areas. Like you want to have regional impact, which gives you national impact, which gives you global impact. So it just grows, but it's from this place of beginnings with yourself, right? And I think it's so important that people start to realize that there's people out there doing this work, and you guys you're champions. We need to support you and say, yeah, you move forward. Let's keep doing this. Yeah, I think you're doing really great work. If people wanted to come and check out what you're doing, either in person, like, do you have in-person things going on?
Yeah, I'm open to people coming and visiting anytime they want. It's just pretty cold in the winter. We don't have, like, the mill is indoors, but we don't have indoor facilities for anything else in the winter. But all summer long, we do tours and we have open farm events and we do workshops on sheep and wool and natural dyeing and all of that. So yeah, and we are only like 10 minutes off the Trans-Canada. So if someone is doing that drive from Western Canada to Central and Eastern Canada, we're good to stop.
I will be heading back sometime, probably in June. So maybe I'll have to stop by and say hi.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, we're very close to the city of Winnipeg and the Trans-Canada. So yeah, put it on your list. I would love that. Sure. And if people want to follow along, I try and post about our adventures in my newsletter and on Instagram and Facebook, and yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I think that you're definitely worth following. I've been following you for a while now, and that's how I found you and said, hey, I want to talk to her because she's doing cool stuff. One other question I wanted to ask you, this is backing up a little bit. You were talking about fiber sheds. Can you talk to folks here about what a fiber shed is?
Sure.
Not everybody will know, right? I mostly talk to quilters.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So Fibreshed is an international organization, but it's based on like this affiliate model. So every region has their own local chapter. It was started in 2010 in Northern California by this woman named Rebecca Burgess, who said for a year she wanted to wear clothing that had all been grown, dyed, sewn, manufactured, whatever, everything within 100 miles of her Northern California home. Nice. And this was just sort of like a personal challenge based on the research and the stuff she was interested in. But that journey for her turned into this movement, and, a fiber shed based on the concept of a watershed. So what are all the land, animals, people, laborers, whatever, impacted within your immediate area by the clothing and the textiles that you consume? So, Fibreshed, we have one here in Manitoba called the Pembina Fibreshed, and it looks really different than Fibreshed in Arizona, right? Because
climate's totally different, right?
Climate is totally different. They can grow cotton or whatever, whereas we are mostly wool. And so we work with producers, so mostly sheep and alpaca farmers, natural dyers. So what is our color palette that we can actually grow here? What are those colors we can get? And we look at labor. What is our capacity to transform textiles into finished goods or transform fiber into finished textiles? And so working to support everyone in those levels. So we do a lot of hands-on stuff. So we'll do spinning workshops, or we'll do natural dye workshops. We'll supply people with natural dye plants. We just did a fish skin tanning workshop, which was super interesting. Cool. Manitoba has some huge lakes, and so fishing is a huge part of the culture and the diet here. But we learned how to transform fish skin into a textile, into leather. So we'll do those sort of hands-on things, but then we also do a lot of advocacy. We're hoping to start a campaign this year on textile waste. So what happens in our region with all the textile waste, and how can we be set up to make better decisions around that? So yeah.
Cool. That's all really exciting stuff. I'm really glad I remembered to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I think it's important that people know. And there's fiber sheds in all regions, right? Like they're not specific to just Manitoba and California.
Yeah. Yeah, they are all over. And if you go to Fibreshed, and that's the American spelling, FIBER shed.com, they actually have a map of all the fiber sheds all over the world, and you can find out, where yours is or whatever.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to talk more. I'm excited to come and visit you, and yeah, we'll have more conversations for sure in the not too distant future. Tell everybody your website address and how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Yeah. So longwayhomestead.com, and on Instagram and Facebook, it's just at longwayhomestead. Yeah, awesome. Those are the best places. My newsletter is pretty exciting. That's a funny thing to say. I try and write a lot about what's happening in the bigger industry, but also what's happening on our farm and the silly things that my sheep are doing that day or that week or whatever. Nice. So yeah. Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's always a great way to support local small businesses, is to actually subscribe to the newsletter. And that's a way of showing you support.
Oh, and I wrote a book.
You wrote a book? Oh my goodness. Okay, let's pause. Wait a minute. We're not ending this conversation. You wrote a book. Tell me about that.
I wrote a book called Sheep, Shepherd, and Land. I wrote it with my best friend, who's also a sheep farmer on that side. There it is, Christelle. And so it's there's a lot of photos in this book. It's highly filled with beautiful photos of sheep.
Nice.
So I wanted to tell the story of the different sheep breeds across the country and the land bases that they sort of thrive in. Okay. And as I started doing this, I realized that I can't talk about sheep and I can't talk about their relationship to land without talking about the farmers that are raising them. So I interviewed 12 farmers across the country who are doing creative or innovative or exciting things with wool or with land management and sheep. And we put it in a beautiful book with beautiful pictures. And I wish that this would have been my words, but it wasn't. But someone described my book as part manifesto, part love letter about wool. So that's kind of the best way to describe it.
That's an amazing way to describe that. Thank you for sharing that so much. And thank you for talking to me today. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you. It was all my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really loved kind of digging into this idea of 100-mile diet and our local economies, and taking a look at what regional economies might look like. That's something that's really exciting to me. And, it doesn't matter whether you're in the Canadian fiber shed or if you're in the US or the UK or wherever you might be, the same concepts apply no matter where you are. And we need to start looking at what these fiber sheds can be and how we can utilize them and how we can support people who are doing regenerative textiles like this. I think it's such an important thing. If you're interested in Anna's books, she has 2 books out right now. One of them is called The True Cost of Wool, and it's an exploration through vivid storytelling and meticulous research. She's looking at the environmental impacts of shipping wool thousands of kilometers and the true labor that's involved in the yarn production. So very relevant to the conversations we were having. And I think it's a really interesting take on all of this. So I highly recommend heading over to her website. That is longwayhomestead.com, and take a look at that. She also has her other book, which is Sheep, Shepherd, and Land. And it's conversations with folks who are doing this type of work, doing production work, and really worth having a look at. Her whole website is actually very cool. And if you're in that area, you should go check it out. Absolutely. Anyway, thanks for joining me this time. I am looking forward to connecting with you more and talking to you more about resiliency and talking to you about circularity in textiles, talking to you about sustainability and what it means for us today, and who's doing the work and what it means for those people doing that work. Anyway, I'm so glad you joined me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.